Thanks for sitting down with us. Appreciate it.
Of course, yeah. A lot happened.
Yeah, well,
A lot of news to cover, right?
a few things.
Hey, Andres, can I give that to you?
Governor, thank you so much for sitting down with us today. No, a busy schedule for you. I just want to get your reaction first to some of the most recent incidents we've seen. There's video of a parent teenager in Hoffman Estates being taken out of her car. Obviously, the WGN employee in Lincoln Square being arrested and detained. No charges that we know of yet. Videos of ICE agents on the north side clipping other vehicles. Do you know anything about these incidents and your general reaction to just the last few days?
Well, it's very disturbing what's happening. They're overstepping the boundaries of their authority, ICE and CBP. I also would say that I think you should pay close attention to the fact that they're getting filmed in all of these circumstances, which is very helpful because it helps us to go to court and get some limitations. You saw that we won in court, not just the TRO, but also about the behavior and actions and whether they're ICE must identify themselves in these circumstances, and they must. So we're winning slowly but surely as the evidence is coming in, but I have to say it is abominable, the unconstitutional actions that are taking place. And here's the most tragic part. Usually the inspectors general of the United States, the ones who work in the departments like the Department of Homeland Security, when something goes wrong, when an agent does something wrong, typically they investigate and they'll hold somebody responsible. I don't trust at all that the Trump administration is going to hold any of these people responsible. We will. We're going to call for accountability, and indeed, the tables will turn someday. These people should recognize that maybe they're not going to get prosecuted today, although we're looking at doing that, but they may get prosecuted after the Trump administration for the things that they did because the statute of limitations won't have run.
When you say we're looking at some kind of prosecution, are you talking about the Attorney General? Are you talking about state police? So what avenues or jurisdictions would the state have to go after some of these federal agents that you might think are operating unconstitutionally?
Well, I think it's pretty obvious some of it really is unconstitutional, but we're just talking to the state's attorneys and to the Attorney General of the state of Illinois about how they can go at this, because what we really want is to make sure that they follow the law. We had the immigration services, ICE and CBP doing their jobs before the Trump administration, but they were doing it within the law. Now they're acting like a bunch of thugs and taking away people's free speech rights. They're taking away people's rights, by not identifying themselves. They're coming in with masks on. They're coming in with unidentified vehicles. These are all things that need to be taken up, again, by an inspector general or somebody investigating at the federal level because they have immunity at the state level. But we're looking at how we might be able to hold them responsible despite the fact of federal immunity.
What's striking is they're doing this in broad daylight, some cases busy intersections during rush hour. Does that add to the claim that perhaps they're doing this on purpose to provoke?
It's clear that they are doing it on purpose to provoke it. And I should add that they lie every time they do one of these things. They claim that something happened that didn't really. We saw a WGN producer being, handled in a way that you wouldn't see a trained police officer do. And they're going after people. You heard, of course, the shooting and killing of the man in Franklin Park, where at first they said the officer was seriously injured and being dragged, and then later you heard no serious injuries. But the initial report out of ICE was this release that said something terrible had happened by this man that they shot and killed. So you can tell they lie every time, it seems like. So we can't believe it when they say it. We do have to do our own investigations. And that's why it's so vital that people are pulling out their phones and filming.
And in fact, this has been the crux of federal judge rulings, that they believe that DHS statements are unreliable. You mentioned the Franklin Park man, Silverio Villegas Gonzalez. And absolutely, we've seen video that doesn't comport to the narrative from DHS. But is there an investigation the state can do to get to the bottom of what exactly happened, even if the FBI says they're conducting one right now?
Well, I have to say that not only have we looked into it, but also we've seen the news media do a very good job of investigating and reporting on what really happened. We've all got to be in this together. There's no way that you can have one agency or another agency with all the things that ICE is doing to break the law, what I believe is breaking the law. We really need everybody to be on alert for this.
Larry Snelling, the CPD superintendent, basically said, no matter what you think about this, we don't arrest other law enforcement. Does the Illinois State Police have any jurisdiction to make an arrest if they see a federal agent acting unlawfully?
Look, there is still federal immunity for federal agents, and that's what Larry Snelling is referring to, but not for egregious violations of the law. Obviously, just a straight up, violent crime that occurs by one of them, they can be arrested for. But we have to step back and recognize that the President of the United States essentially has been pardoning people who are committing violent crimes. He himself is a convicted felon. He'd like to be able to pardon himself, but he was convicted in a state court in New York. Now he's going after the person who convicted him because he's so vindictive that and recognizes that he has so much power as the President of the United States that he can target his political opponents, and he's doing that. He's targeted me. He's targeted the mayor of Chicago. He's targeted lots of folks. We've seen people actually being prosecuted. So this is a dangerous time. The President of the United States is causing mayhem on the grounds in our state. He is going after his political opponents. I don't know why anybody would look at the situation and not recognize that he is moving toward making the United States an authoritarian regime in his own image.
And, at the same time, Border Patrol Chief Commander Gregory Bovino has said that you have escalated the threat level that they're facing. Their agents are getting doxxed. Their agents face threats. You call them things like jackbooted thugs. Are you adding fuel to the fire here to this tinderbox?
No, you remember this is the same guy that goes around thinking he's a social media influencer, filming himself saying provocative things. They brought cameras around the South Shore building when they attacked that building and took, there are 130 people who live in that building, and only a couple few were being targeted as gang members, and yet they detained the entire building, including children and the elderly. So Gregory Bovino lies consistently, as does Kristi Noem, the president, the vice president of the United States. It's a tidal wave of lies, and it's hard to overcome those lies because it's propaganda. The media seems to cover it more than they do what the truth actually is often. So we have to speak up about this. And I would say just about Gregory Bovino, this is a guy who is instructing his people to fire gas pellets at people who are just expressing peacefully their First Amendment rights. You're allowed to yell things and hold a sign and protest. That is a fundamental right in the United States. And yet they fire tear gas, they fire rubber bullets at people. You saw the video probably of the pastor who got hit in the head and who was actually hit multiple times with those gas pellets. I mean, this is Gregory Bovino's orders that they're following. So he just has no credibility at all.
And he and Tom Homan will say, or they've said from the beginning, we could avoid all of this if the state would just cooperate, if the city would cooperate, if they would change their sanctuary policies and cooperate on law enforcement finding undocumented criminals.
Well, the federal government doesn't get to hold a state hostage to change our state laws. That's not how the Constitution works. And Tom Homan, who now it's been revealed is somebody who's accepted bribes, Gregory Bovino, somebody who's giving unlawful orders. I mean, these are not guys that have any credibility in my eyes.
And you've said very provocatively, come and get me. Is there evidence that you have to believe that perhaps we've seen the Trump administration direct the DOJ to target his perceived enemies, that they might come after you for something, some perceived...
Look, I'm not provoking anybody. The President of the United States is the one who stood up and said he'd like to jail me and jail the mayor of the city of Chicago. I'm just responding to, he doesn't have any right to do so. We've not broken any laws. In fact, he's the one who breaks laws on a regular basis. I find that ironic as heck. And I really believe believe that it's appropriate to call them out on the lies and to just say, like, come get me, because you can't.
And it's given you this national platform, and it seems like you and Governor Newsom are filling a bit of a void here in the Democratic Party, where the governors here on the front lines have been the most outspoken to try to get the country to understand what the administration is doing. Has that caused an elevated threat level for you? Can you just talk about the threats you might receive and how that's impacted your own safety?
Look, my number one job is to protect the people of the state of Illinois, so I'm going to stand up to the bullying tactics, to the violent actions of the federal administration. I'm going to speak out about it and encourage people to do so peacefully across the state of Illinois. I also believe it's important for people across the country to stand up, because if they're doing it to Chicago and they're doing it to Portland and they've done it to LA and to Washington, D.C., that is to put troops on the ground, or even, by the way, if they don't deploy troops, remember, they're putting ICE and CBP in fatigues with automatic weapons, walking the streets of Chicago, downtown Chicago, and Portland. The president is lying about, Portland's on fire. That's just not happening. And Chicago, that's not, listen, we've got crime like other big cities, but we're not even in the top 25. So I really do think that I'm trying to use my voice and my platform to protect Illinois, and hope that people across the country will help protect Illinois by speaking out in their states. And guess what? You're already seeing it. Governor Stitt in Oklahoma, a Republican, has stood up and said, I wouldn't want Illinois sending National Guard into my state. And the people of Oklahoma would be outraged. The Governor Scott from Vermont said it's unconstitutional to do so. These are two pretty prominent Republican governors, and I think it's evidence that there is beginning to be a break from Donald Trump by some Republicans who see that what he is doing is overstepping the bounds of the Constitution and the law, and I applaud them for doing that.
And maybe so there's Rubicons that are being crossed here, although not apparently for Governor Abbott of Texas, who thinks it's perfectly consistent to not want other states' National Guard in his state, but to send his state's National Guard to another state.
Correct, and in fact, he called out President Biden last year for the very thing that now President Trump is doing, which is he didn't want Biden federalizing his National Guard for the purposes that he wanted, that President Biden wanted, and now he's okay. He's just stepping back and saying, yeah, sure, go ahead, federalize my National Guard for this purpose. By the way, he's preparing for and believes that they're going to have some pretty devastating floods in Texas and needs his National Guard. He ought to get them the heck out of Illinois and send them back so they can protect the state of Texas instead of invading our state.
Speaking of National Guard, the appeals court partially upheld the lower court ruling, saying they can still be on the base here in Illinois. They can't be deployed. So your understanding that the Trump administration is complying with that they're on a base right now, that they're not deployed anywhere in the region? That's
my understanding. I mean, I've said over and over, they don't communicate with us, which is the strangest thing I've ever seen. The federal government always communicates with state government, and frankly, we should be coordinating to make sure there's no misunderstandings, to make sure we're working together on the things that we should, but we don't get any direct information. They seem to be staying on the federal facility grounds in Joliet, in Elwood, and the court only allowed them to stay federalized because the president has the ability to federalize troops. The question is not, can he federalize National Guard? The question is, how can he use those federalized troops? Typically, they are federalized to be sent abroad to protect this nation. And I can tell you about the Illinois National Guard, some of the bravest people in the entire country, and they have been sent abroad to protect this country. And I'm so proud of them. None of them want to be on the streets of Illinois opposing peaceful protesters on the ground, or even standing with the unlawful acts of ICE or CBP, as I think the Texas National Guard members. These are probably good people who volunteered to serve their country, but not to stand against, average, everyday Americans who are just expressing themselves.
There is so much going on with this. It's all encompassing, but we do have a veto session coming up in the state legislature, so I do have to get your thoughts on some things. The RTA downgraded downgraded vastly its fiscal cliff number from $779 million down to around $200 million. Does that change the urgency of getting a transit bill through in veto session?
We're on the same timeline, attempting to get something done as soon as we can. I am very hopeful that a transit bill will, in fact, appear in the legislature in the veto session and will get voted on. We've been working with the legislature, listening to them. They're crafting the bill. We've been helping them with that process, but it's going to be up to the legislature to bring it up and vote on it. The Senate has already, although obviously that bill not yet acceptable to people in the House, and I think there are changes that are needed, and so I think we're going to see something, but again, we've got to see the leaders and the members step up.
The funding mechanism is what the disputes were partially around. Do you anticipate a final package having rideshare taxes, delivery fees as sort of funding mechanisms to fund this?
Look, I can't speak to those specific methods. What I can say is you got to fund things that you need, right? We need downstate transit dollars. We need dollars for Northern Illinois as well, as we know, RTA, CTA, PACE, and you can't, the money doesn't come from nowhere. You've got to, somehow you've got to pay for these things. I know Republicans don't typically like to. They think you can just, do away with revenue, but everything's going to get paid for anyway. No, that leads to deficits, which is what we saw under the prior Republican governor.
All right, well, that brings up my next point about the Tier 2 police and fire pension bill, which you said that, well, the mayor never called you and asked you to veto it. He didn't really make his feelings known very clearly one way or another, but your administration did get a letter from the city CFO basically saying it would make the funds technically insolvent. It would cost $11 billion. It's an unfunded mandate. You might not have heard from the mayor, but you have a long history in investment. Surely you had to look at this bill and say this was going to be problematic for Chicago's finances, no?
Look, you've got to pay for and deliver pensions that people have earned. And the police officers of the city of Chicago, as the policemen all across the state do, have earned their pensions, and firefighters too. And you know that I passed a comprehensive bill to improve and consolidate our pension systems for firefighters and police officers. And it is delivering literally hundreds of millions of dollars more for the pension systems across our state. The city of Chicago needs to do something similar. They didn't want to be part of that bill back then, but you can't just walk away from the needs of the pensions that police officers are owed. And so we did what the city of Chicago has been doing, by the way, for a long time, which is they true up those pensions. It's not in the law, but the city knows that they need to do it, and so they do it on a regular basis. It was proposed and passed nearly unanimously in the legislature. I don't think there were any. I think there maybe was one vote against it out of 177 members of the General Assembly, and so that bill, I think, is appropriate to supporting our men in blue.
But should the state then, if it's delivering this mandate to the city of Chicago, help Chicago find funding for it?
Look, the city of Chicago, it has to also deal with its own challenges with its budget, just like the state of Illinois does. We deliver billions of dollars to the city of Chicago from the state already, and it's been increasing every year, year in and year out. So the idea that we're not delivering for the city of Chicago is just false. I think the city's got to do what the state is doing, which is look at every nook and cranny and ask, where can we pare spending or be more efficient? Where can we adjust some of the revenue that's coming in, again, just to get a balanced budget. We do that every single year. I have done that since I came in office, despite the fact that I walked into office where there were deficits for 20 years before I got here, and made sure that we're paying the bills.
I'm getting the wrap, but I do just the last topic. You have said that the Bears, perhaps, you might support this property tax certainty bill that they're asking for if the Bears pay off the nearly $500 million debt that Soldier Field still has on the renovation. Is the team actually receptive to that? Or will there be negotiations on having them do that, perhaps?
I think the point I was trying to make was simply that we can't leave the taxpayers on the hook for something that the teams ultimately were supposed to be paying for. And so I wanted to make sure the Bears knew that for us to move forward and to help them with infrastructure funding, for example, or a pilot bill that they're looking to get passed, we need to know that whatever deal gets struck here is something that does not cost the taxpayers any more than it already has. And I really believe that we've got to protect our taxpayers from the idea that they're going to pay for stadiums for billionaire owners or billion-dollar teams.
All right, Governor Pritzker, a lot on your plate. Thank you for sitting down with us. We appreciate it.
Thank you.